Good morning, invisible friends. My name is Rinaldo Aguiar, and my full name is Rinaldo J. Aguiar Marcano. And today is July 13, 2025, and it's about 4:50 a.m. U.S. Central Time. And I'm located at my home at the 26714 Valley Side Drive, Katy, Texas 77494. I'm recording this video as part of the civic campaign that I'm advancing called Bring Diosdado Cabello to Justice, Bring Diosdado Cabello to the US. And the reason why I'm advancing this campaign is explaining all the other videos. I invite you, all of you, to please watch the previous sessions because they will give you context for what I'm going to say on this one. So before I begin, I want to address the obvious. Why am I dressed differently today? It's because today I want to talk about a topic or an industry, really, the finance industry. And I have a lot of context on this because besides the obvious, that I captured the database of Elon Musk that has all the financial crimes recorded in it. Besides that, because I worked in that industry as well years ago. So what happened was after I filed or attempted to file that human resources complaint or reverse discrimination, naming Michael Shupert and Hila Becker, which then prompted to Michael to supposedly come out of the closet. He's not, I don't think he's not really gay. He was pretending to be gay as a, crisis management technique. And this wasn't his decision, probably. Like all this came from the network. But after I did that, shortly after, they moved me to Goldman Sachs. And I think I cannot read their thoughts, but putting things together, I believe that was a combination of getting me out of that environment in case to avoid a situation where I could try to file a lawsuit or something. And also the second reason I think was because they had Mayur at Goldman Sachs, Mayur Thakur, who was my manager at Google before. They had him at Goldman Sachs developing a search engine for espionage. That's what it is, right? And I think he was, they thought that he was struggling in getting it done and that he needed help. So they also moved me there to try to replicate the same situation they had going on at Google, where Mayur was the manager. And the reason why he was struggling is because he was the manager at Google. Like, he wasn't writing code. He was just giving orders, which is what people in the network like to do. They don't like to do any work. They like to order other people to do the work. But that's another weakness of this network. They don't know how to get things done. So that's why they need the rest of us, like the rest of the other 99.96% of the population. They need us because they don't know how to do things, because the only thing that they know how to do is to spy. Anyhow, I think Mayur was struggling, and I say that because I went to Goldman Sachs to work there for a few years, and I saw that it wasn't really working, right? So they moved me there with that double purpose, to get me out of Google so I couldn't cause any trouble for the plants. By the way, the real plant, I think, is Gila, because Michael has the skills. Michael Schupper, like, he has real skills. He's pretty good. He's better engineer than me. But Gila, she has no skills. So I think Michael's role was to make sure Gila could advance. That was his role. So that's why the other thing I made a mention that I thought, I made it on the post section of the YouTube channel. I said something like, I understood that Gila is actually higher ranking for the criminal network, right? She's more important than Michael. And the reason I say that is because I realized that the technique is promoting the plants, planting the seeds and then making them plants and promoting them all the way through the corporate ladder or the government ladder. And the problem they have is that the plants have no skills. So they have to harass everybody that can compete with the plants. And also I understood that the other part of that is that they have a real person that does have skills that helps the plant get promoted. In this case, it was Michael. But I've seen this in other scenarios as well, in other companies. So that's why I think Gila is probably more important than Michael for the criminal organization. Anyhow, so getting back to the topic at hand, I want to talk about today about finance, high finance, really, and particularly about Goldman Sachs. So I figured I would wear my clothes from my Goldman Sachs days because I would like that when they see this video, the people from Goldman Sachs, that they understand how exposed this is. And I know that they have this kind of a tunnel vision. If you don't dress like this, they don't listen to your ideas. I saw that firsthand. So you have to dress this way, otherwise they won't understand what I'm saying. So anyhow, let's begin. Another question that you may have is why do this so early? It's barely 5 a.m., right? There's a few reasons. One is an experiment I'm running, and the second is Ryan O'Sullivan cannot now turn on his leaf blower or his grass cutting machine because it's too early. And I'm just making a joke because of something really funny that happened yesterday. I invite you to check it out in the channel. In fact, I think I'll play for you a little video because it's so funny. It's so funny to watch. So maybe it's a good way to start the day. So what happened yesterday? Yeah, I've known this for a while because when I lived in Lake Point Estates, which is a small community controlled by this criminal network and Diosdado Cabello and Phil Denny and those people. So it's a spy planned community, basically. And I lived there for a year almost. And during that time, I saw this trick countless times. So I know, what it is, which made me reflect on the fact that before I left this house a year ago, I really had no chance because I didn't have the database and I hadn't seen all these tricks from up close. But coming back to this neighborhood a few weeks ago, now armed with the database and armed with the knowledge of having gone to, let's call it spy school, intensive spy school for a year, these people have no chance. The neighbors here at Valleyside Drive. Anyhow, so this is what this character was doing yesterday. So the thing, what they do is that they have the house behind his house. So his house is 26706 Valleyside Drive, Katy, Texas, 77494. And his name, supposedly, is Ryan O'Sullivan. I think it's a fake name. And I think they picked O'Sullivan after Annie Sullivan from Google, who was a person that I had good interactions with at Google. But anyhow, so the reason I'm going to show you what he's doing, but the reason why he's doing this is to send an auditory cue to the house on his backyard, which is the house that has the Xfinity tap aggregator that my house is connected to. And what he's doing is signaling to that house that I'm connected to the internet. So they start running the interception. They have some sort of hardware interception there. They take the packets coming from this TCP/IP packets coming from my house, and then they retransmit them using their military-grade antennas. But what they're doing is doing this on demand only, not 24/7. I guess they're scared that the FBI could backtrace what they're doing, could intercept their communications if they have this thing running all the time. So to minimize the probability of that happening, what they're doing is they only do it when I connect to the internet. And so he has to signal that house that he's connected. And that this is what they do. So he was fake cutting the grass, basically. And this is in the channel, on the Call Mobile channel, on the shorts section. So you'll see, he walks the machine and he's making a lot of, like, that machine makes a lot of noise. You cannot hear because it's mute, but, and I'm also like, this is shot from maybe like 120 feet away. So this is at zoom level 20 in my phone. Yeah, it looks close, but it's really very far. But it's still so far away, I can hear the noise here. Anyhow, you'll see that he's walking the machine only through the concrete and through the pavement and on the road, pretending that he's cutting the grass. The reason is that he needs to make a lot of noise, and if he was really cutting the grass, then the grass would be short. And then if he has to do it again tomorrow, I would say, I would notice that he's cutting a grass that is already short. So the solution they found to that is that they do this trick where they pretend to be cutting the grass, but they're not really cutting anything. They're letting the grass grow. And eventually they will really cut it, but it was short, so he couldn't cut it this time, and then he did this. And this went on for 30 minutes. Well, it's a very small area. I think that's probably something like 15 feet to 15 feet of grass. Like you can cut that in 3 minutes, 4 minutes. But he spent like half an hour on that. Just, and it's comical to watch. And also, to say the obvious, the reason why he doesn't fear ridicule is because he knows that the people in front of him are also spies. So they know what he's doing. Otherwise, they would think that he's crazy, just walking the machine on the pavement like that for half an hour. But anyhow, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this early today, so he cannot pull that trick again today and cannot notify the house. And I'm curious to see if they are intercepting the traffic today as well. So anyhow, his name is Ryan O'Sullivan at 26706 Valleyside Drive, Katy, Texas 77494. And just to close on this, which might be a good data point, now that we know that they're bouncing the signals of the satellites, it is trivial to backtrack where they're sending the data to, because this has a timestamp when they were using that machine. So it means that the transmission should be very close by. And we know that the house that has the tap is the one on the back. So now we have the timestamp and the point of origin of the transmission. And with that, we could backtrace which were the satellites, say in that hour, that could have passed through viable points, so that when the signal comes down, it ends up at a house that is also marked in the index. It's a small set of possibilities. It's not that big. It could be maybe 100 possible targets. That could tell us where they're sending the data to. It's a solvable problem with a bit of computer science. Okay, so that's the reason why. And speaking of taps, so the Xfinity aggregators, I also want to mention that it was picked up by the pipeline that all the aggregators, all the Xfinity aggregators that are placed on the streets in Katy, in public streets. So there's two types of aggregators. Like usually they're placed on the backyard of a house, so in private property. Like in this case, where they have the aggregator that serves my house in one of their houses. And that's how they steal my data when I'm connected to this internet. But there's other aggregators in Katy that happen to be on the street, like on the sidewalk. It was picked up by the pipeline that most of the aggregators in Katy that are on the sidewalk, on public roads, are under heavy surveillance, meaning right next to the aggregator, there is a car or multiple cars parked Moscow style, watching the radio frequency spectrum and visually surveilling the aggregator. And it seems to be the case that the more cars that are parked next to the aggregator correlate with the importance or the risk of the agent that lives near that aggregator. Because there is a physical distance at which you can live from the aggregator. Like that, there is a technical limitation. Like the aggregator is there because your house has to be less than, I don't know what it is really, but say 100 feet away. There's a distance. Because after that, the signal degrades and the internet service quality degrades too much. So I guess this is important because if authorities see these aggregators with 3 or 4 cars parked next to it, it means that less than 100 feet away, there is a super prominent agent or somebody that carries a lot of risk for Diosdado Cabello, specifically. So it's a good way to pick targets. That's why when I went to see that neighborhood the other day, that there was a police officer car parked in a driveway surrounded by safe houses and agents' houses. They had, so that police officer has the aggregator outside of his home in the sidewalk, and there was a car parked Moscow style next to that aggregator, precisely watching that nobody plugs into the aggregator, which is silly, really, if you think about it, because I imagine that the NSA is not going to send people to plug into the aggregators. It's just silly to think what's going to happen. I imagine the NSA has a way of intercepting things at a higher level of aggregation, like at the T11 connection or in Louisiana at the regional interconnect. I imagine like this. I don't think that the criminals have to do that because they're spies and they don't have legal control of the country. But I imagine the real authorities don't have to come to Katie with the cable and plug into the aggregator. It's silly to think that way. But anyhow, I think that also shows how ignorant they are. Okay. For now, I'm going to move on to the guess who section. And because we're in the topic of finance and I'm dressed in this way, I figure let's talk about people that are in finance that are very prominent. So I'm gonna show you the pictures and I'm gonna say the names, of course. And before I say all this, I want to say that all this is documented in the website. You can go to the spybusters.com/evidence, and there's tons of information there about each one of these individuals, and they're also all of them named by name in the Form 211 that I submitted to the IRS, the master form, and in some individual forms as well. And the form, you can download it. There's multiple ways. One is the spybusters.com. There's a link to download the form. And also, you could simply type in your browser form211.org, and that will redirect you automatically to the form. You can download the full form. It has 164,000 pages. And that form covers almost 1 million entities in total. So the first person that I'm going to mention is somebody called Jerome H. Powell, who is the chair of the Federal Reserve of the US. And this is relevant because these are entities. The Federal Reserve, for example, is an entity with which Goldman Sachs and its executives and directors interact daily. And in some sense, the Federal Reserve has authority over things that Goldman Sachs do. And so it's incredible that the chair of the Federal Reserve is part of the same network, it's a criminal network, as all these directors and managing directors and executives from Goldman Sachs. It's hard to understand. So also, there's a person by the name Philip N. Jefferson, the vice chair of the Federal Reserve, is also, and all these people are marked in Elon Musk's Geo Index. That's why I'm mentioning them. It's not inferences, guesses, all this is coming from the data that is recorded in this database of Elon Musk that was given to me by Diosdado Cabello and Vladimir Patrino Lopez in the process of harassing me using the same database. Also, Lisa Denil Cook, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the last names correctly. I have a little bit of trouble with the last names, but I'll make sure that the spelling is correct in the captions and in the transcripts. So Lisa Denil Cook, also a member of the Federal Reserve Board. Then we have Michael Barr, also flagged. And Governor Waller, Christopher Waller, also flagged. Thomas Barking, also flagged. And the people that I'm going to mention are not employees of the Federal Reserve, but my sister, SpyHealth, the SpyHealth pipeline, co-clustered them via data analysis with the people of the Federal Reserve. Like they're part of this. If you think of I guess a good way to present this as an analogy would be if you think of a company has multiple departments, and you could have people that work in HR, you could have people that work in, and some of those departments have like cross lines, meaning some people, like some specific people in HR, may be connected with a dotted line with somebody from engineering. I don't know, because maybe they're working on an engineering project for HR, or something like that. So that dotted line is a way of clustering. It means that there is a relationship that, although it might not be obvious, it is there. So my system believes there is a relationship between the individuals I'm going to mention now, which are more on the political side of the political department of this criminal enterprise, but they have like dotted lines to the Federal Reserve and to Goldman Sachs. Okay. So one individual is Pam Bondi. The other individual is Marcos Rubio. Next, we have Senator Ted Cruz. And all this is documented in the website with satellite images, data from the database, like all the documentation is there. Next person is Pete Hegseth. And the next person is Scott Bestnet. Okay. And Scott Bestnet is interesting because it has a mini compound, that mansion. Let me see if I can find the address in Spy Hill real quickly. Yes. So he has yes, the address is 5 East Battery in Charleston. That mansion is interesting because it's in the middle of a cluster in the middle of a mini compound. And I believe the reason they had to do that is because the address, this is the mansion he bought years ago. The address doesn't fall, the address falls in 05, which is a reserve channel for intelligence. And he's not in intelligence, so they couldn't set up that house, the communications in that house, because he would be able to listen to things of Russian intelligence and Cuban intelligence and Venezuelan intelligence. So what they did instead is that they bought the properties next door and they set up the communications in the properties next door. So that's just giving you that as a tip. And the other person that I want to mention that also has this link to Goldman Sachs is Louis DeJoy. He was the postmaster general. I don't know if there is correlation here or causality, but he retired from being the postmaster general like a week after I posted his name on the website. So it could be that they saw that there could be liability and then they removed him. I am mentioning that because the mechanism of removal, how did they remove him, could lead to some good information on how they pull the agents from those positions of power that quickly. Because somebody has to be pulling those strings. So that's the people that are not directly on the Goldman Sachs cluster, but have dotted lines to the Goldman Sachs cluster that all are marked in the index. Elon Musk, and all of them are flagged by the system. So now let's talk about the Goldman Sachs people, okay? And these are a lot of people. And again, these people I know personally because I interacted with them when they moved me to Goldman Sachs from Google. I was at Google, but because I made that complaint about Michael Schubert and Gila, they moved me to Goldman Sachs. So I know these people personally, and I've been in meetings with them countless times. So I'm not, maybe some of them will not have photos here, but I'll try. Marco Argenti, his flag. It's DJ Solomon, I call him that way. Right? The CEO, of course, is flagged. I don't know if you would recall when I proposed that hypothetical game, human systems, that I said, obviously, the one who plays first will want to take the director because it's the person with most decision-making power in the system. That's the reason why they have to take the CEOs every time. And he's the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and he's flagged, and his properties are flagged and everything. And I don't know, he DJs, he has a gig as a DJ when he's not working in Goldman Sachs. There's also a person, Donovan. He's a juncture. He has dotted lines to all these people on the political team of the organization, the ones that I just mentioned before. He's also from Goldman Sachs. Let me see. Yes, this one. Jim Donovan. Very important player. Okay, and now the next ones that I'm going to mention, I'm not going to show the pictures because they're more like, I want to say low level, but they're not CEOs. So Scott Weinstein, high liability because he was my manager. He was assigned as my manager. And yeah, there were a lot of harassment incidents during my tenure at Goldman Sachs in which Scott Weinstein with Sinead Strain, who was his manager, both of them were working together as a team harassing me, using even the legal department, what do they call it, the employee relations department of Goldman Sachs to harass me. In one of the instances, I ended up in the ER. The level of physical harassment that Scott applied was so big that I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And that's when I quit. After that day, that was the day I decided I was leaving because I was not going to have a heart attack for any amount of money. But I remember I went to the ER very close to Goldman Sachs. I took a cab and it took 5 minutes to get there. And I remember when I was in the emergency room, I emailed Sinead. So I'm mentioning this because if authorities can subpoena that email, you will see that I'm telling the truth. I emailed Sinead Strain, who was basically my manager's manager, telling her that I was in the ER because I had an incident with Scott and I wasn't feeling well. And I asked her, silly me, I asked her not to tell Scott anything because I thought if he knew that he can really affect me, he will do it more. But I'm saying silly me because obviously they were working together. So anything I said to the whole company is owned by this network, Goldman Sachs. So anything I said to any of them, they all knew it. The next person is Michael Schlee. Michael Schlee, I think he's a partner now. He was a managing director when I joined, but now he's a partner. And he was Mayur Thakur's manager. Basically, he hired Mayur in 2015, I think, or 14, to build Neon, is what they call it, Neon. That's the internal name of the system. And it's a search engine, okay? It's a search engine that, imagine a Google search engine, but what it does, it searches through, instead of searching through web pages, it searches through internal communications and documents. So imagine a search engine like Google that you could use to index all your internal communications and memos and documents and things, and that it worked with the same precision as Google. So when you ask for something, it would tell you which is the most important document in the entire company about that topic. Something like that. I believe after getting the GOE index and getting the database and building a spy hell and analyzing all this data, that they were building that search engine not really for Goldman Sachs, but I believe it was for the network. Imagine the power they would have if they took Neon, if it worked, right? What Major had didn't work. It wasn't a good implementation, but imagine for a second that it worked. Imagine that instead of indexing internal documents of Goldman Sachs, you take the same system and you index all the data that you steal from all your targets around the world. In this way that they're doing it with the neighbors, with the like the Ryan Sullivans, but on the entire planet. You take all that data and you index it in Neon. What you have is a nuclear weapon. It's a tool, it's a search engine that tells you among all your targets who are talking about what. And interestingly, when I was at Goldman, Major explained to me that they were using it, that they were indexing the transcripts of the conversations, because in the banking industry, they have to record for compliance reasons. They have to record basically all the phone conversations. Okay. And so what Major was doing, he was taking the transcripts. So they had a company that basically took the audio and transcribed it. But back then, AI wasn't that advanced, so the auto transcription wasn't very good. So they had a company actually transcribing the things manually, so they could index it in Neon. And now that I'm seeing the surveillance techniques, I'm guessing they're doing the same. Like they're indexing, they're transcribing everything that they listen on all the houses and indexing it in a system equivalent to Neon if it's not Neon or key opinion leaders. Because the scary thought is that with the key opinion leaders technology that they stole from me, they could do this. They could not only find experts, but they could find expert targets if they index the data that they're stealing instead of the medical papers. So I think that's why they wanted also the key opinion leaders technology, because what Major had wasn't very good. Okay, so moving on. Michael Ashley was Major Thakur's manager, and he was responsible, among other things, for this system. And he got promoted to partner, I think, in 2021. Adam Korn, partner, he left, but he was a partner. And importantly, he was the one that did this ruse to trick me and to get me into Goldman Sachs. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about how that trick worked. It was really a ruse and involved different players, but it was part of that. Andrew Phillips, who was Adam Korn's protege, if you wish, also flagged. Leo Brito is interesting because he was a managing director at Goldman Sachs and also Venezuelan, and my system could cluster him with the SEBIN and with Diosdado Cabello. This could be like Diosdado Cabello's representative in Goldman Sachs, something like that. Major Thakur, of course, also flagged. Francis Giannaros, also flagged. Charles Elkan, flagged. Charles Elkan is interesting because he was an executive at Amazon, and he was brought to Goldman Sachs more or less at the same time as me, like a month before or a month after. And he's interesting because he was set up in a way that he would have to interact with me a lot. And he happens to be a Python expert, which is my weapon of choice. So I don't know. And he's flagged. He's flagged for multiple reasons, but the fact that he has those commonalities in terms of programming language and background in tech and all that with me, being flagged and being brought at the same time as me and being put next to me for a couple of years, it feels like it was designed. Okay. Also with Charles, there's also Tao Ni Win, Pawnee Win is interesting because he's flagged and all that, but he's also the grandson of a famous dictator. I think it's from, I can't recall the country. It's a country in South Asia. And his grandfather was a military figure and he was a dictator for 40 years. Terrible dictator. He's the grandson. Also flagged Srinath Maikara, and he was in India. I met him there in person, but then he was transferred to New York after Mayur was moved to H1. So he basically replaced Mayur to try to keep building on Neon. And I imagine with the technology that they stole from key opinion leaders, because in that ruse of stealing my technology, Goldman Sachs was involved in that. Shubhankar Data, also flagged. He's very prominent and he's in India. Michael D. Petkovich was, he's not a Goldman Sachs employee, but he's co-clustered by the pipeline with all these people from Goldman Sachs. And Michael D. Petkovich is also co-clustered with Liana Technologies. And he lives in Lake Point Estates, this controlled community that I call it my spy school. That's where I went to spy school for a year. Bill Denning, he is president of this homeowners association of this Lake Point Estates spy community. Daniel King Everett, and this is interesting. So Daniel King Everett is the registered owner of a house that was diagonal to me at Lake Point Estates. And there's been multiple incidents, harassment incidents documented with people coming out of that house. My cameras have some pictures of this Daniel King Everett or whatever person was posing as him driving this truck right in front of my house because I have the cameras there. And the facial features were clustered by the pipeline with somebody who installed a gate, a doggy gate for me in 2015, I think, 10 years ago. Now, what's interesting is that the physical characteristics of the person driving the truck and the gate installer seem to be very similar to the physical characteristics of David Molero, lightweight facial features, etc. All this is documented in the website. Height, skin color, complexion, skin tone, like long way of saying that it is possible that when my system co-clustered Daniel King Everett with the gate installer, maybe it was a miscomputation in the sense that maybe the more accurate co-clustering would have been with David Molero, but I didn't have any data of David Molero in the pipeline. So the closest match was the gate installer. What I'm trying to say is that it's possible that Daniel King Everett is David Molero. And this is important because if that is the case, it would prove, or it could mean that these people from Goldman Sachs were involved in all this directly. And I've been thinking about, okay, how could that be proven? I think one way, and I'm sorry for overstepping here, but I think one way could be, please allow me to offer a suggestion, okay? I don't know if this would pan out, but sometimes these things pan out. And again, I don't mean to overstep, but if it was me looking into this, I would try to see if David Molero or any of his aliases were recorded traveling to the same places as I travel for work with Goldman Sachs or Google. So there's a few, and again, documented in the website, but for example, there are instances in which these people from Goldman Sachs planned trips for me to go to India, to Bangalore specifically. And during those trips, I also went, I did the trip and on the weekend, I went somewhere else. So one of those trips, I went to Las Vegas to a concert of Bruno Mars. I think it was probably on 2018, on July 21st, 2018, or somewhere around there. I went to Las Vegas and then I flew to India. And you could look for trips that I made to, and I have the places here. I'm going to give you the places. I already did the exercise of thinking which could be good trips to look at. Let me see if I can find it here real quickly. Yes. And so you could look for trips that I did or that my former partner did as well, because in most of those trips, we traveled together, but she would travel a day before or a day after, and she would be with me for part of the trip, but not all the trip. So you could either look for matches with dates of her trips or my trips to these places. To Zurich in Switzerland, Bangalore, India, Las Vegas, Nevada, and San Francisco, California. So there are 4 or 5 trips to those locations, either with my former partner or alone. I would try to see if David Molero or any of his aliases was present in those same trips, maybe even in the same planes. Because that would prove, right, these trips were coordinated by these executives. In fact, there was a trip to India. I think it was the one when I went to Las Vegas. I can't recall. But there was a trip where I met with Sinet Strain, Adam Korn, Majur Sakur, and Michael Ashley, like 24 hours before the trip. And they were the reason of the meeting was them telling me what they were expecting from this trip. So if they were so involved in the planning of this trip and David Molero happened to be there, I think it could be serious, particularly because of the forced vasectomy allegation, the information that I got from the informant. So it could be very serious. And also, in our Guess Who section of today, because we're talking about finance, Warren Buffett is also flagged. So if you ever wonder what is that Warren Buffett knew that nobody else knew that allowed him to make those incredible investment decisions sustained over decades, it's probably this. That's what he knew. Also, I wanted to mention that, and this is important, Goldman Sachs, according to the data, what I'm saying is not, it's not that I have a personal grievance. All I'm saying is coming from the data. According to the data, Goldman Sachs is like the financial institution of this criminal network. Like it's a bank controlled completely and funded completely by China, Venezuela, Cuba, and Russia, and Iran. I'm saying this because that in that world of Goldman Sachs, there is like a hierarchy, people. There's a job ladder in terms of title. And this is important because this company, being so heavily controlled, they're not going to let a person that is not an agent of this network to reach a position of power, because that would put the entire network at risk, obviously. But they use this promotion system as a motivational tool for the agents to make them do unthinkable things. And they make a big deal out of these promotions. Like they issue press releases, and these things are recorded in history. Like when somebody achieves being a managing director at Goldman Sachs, that is like a lifetime achievement for most of them. Or if somebody is named partner, like that, you're almost like a demigod. And they have all these press releases with the names of the managing directors being promoted every 2 years and the partners being promoted every 2 years. So the way it works is that 1 year they promote people to managing director positions, and the next year they promote people to partner. So it's alternate years. So all this is recorded, and all these people are agents. So it's a low-hanging fruit, and I'll show you how to get it. Because they're gonna disappear all these press releases from the internet, so I save them for you. So all you have to do is go to the spybusters.com, click on evidence, then click on browse. When you click on browse, you're gonna be redirected to this You're going to need a Google account to be able to see this, but if you're logged in, you're going to see this, and then you click on notable posts. I'm just walking you through what you have to do to get the list of managing directors and partner promotions over the years. And then look for Goldman. And then there's a folder that says partners and managing directors. And I saved here all the managing director classes, like from 2011, I think, 2010, and the partner classes. So you can see here, so this basically is a list of agents. See, all the names are there. So all you have to do is cross-reference this list because you want to make sure, right, so you want to cross-reference this list with the GeoIndex using the spybusters.com and clicking on paramilitary and crypto and enter here the home address of the person, either when they were employed at Goldman Sachs or today. And if there is a match, it's probably a good candidate to investigate further. Okay. Let's keep going. Now let's talk about the saga, the Goldman Sachs saga itself. You know, how this thing started with Goldman Sachs and what happened. With me personally, and I'm mentioning this not because it's about me, but because this could be legal liability, and legal liability could make people talk, which is the end goal. So they say what really happened. Not in regards to me, but in regards to the crimes committed by Diosdado Cabello. So I'm going to talk about my story with Goldman Sachs. So what happened was I was happy at Google. I was working on interesting projects. I had no complaints except that my stock had vested and my income had been reduced. And I asked them if they would increase it, and they say no. Not increase it, but if they would bring it back to what it was before all my stock vested. And they say no. At the same time, this gentleman by the name Adam Sal started emailing me from Goldman Sachs. He's a recruiter, or was a recruiter, asking me if I would be interested in. And I was entertaining the idea. I wasn't really seriously looking, but I was like, okay, let's talk. And so we had a phone conversation, and they invited me for interviews. I went for the interviews. The interviews really were comical. Like Scott Weinstein in the interview said something like, "You're an engineer from Google. I'm a technical guy, but I can't interview you. There's nothing I can ask you that you won't answer. Let's just have coffee," right? Something like that. That was the interview. And they made me an offer. So when they made me an offer, and here, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about specific numbers and things like that, which I usually avoid because I don't know if it's a good idea, but I think I need to say it because it's important. It's important to give context of the scale of what they do and how they do it and the amount of effort that they put into stealing my technology. At Google, at that time, I was making, I don't know, I don't recall the numbers. Don't quote these numbers. Maybe I'm off, or I don't know. But I assume that I was making, I don't know, say $450,000. I don't know, per year, something like that. I go to the interviews with them, and of course they ask me, how much are you making? I said, you cannot ask me how much I'm making because there's a law that prohibits that to avoid discrimination. Make me your best offer, and I'll see if I'll take it or not. So they made me an offer. It was like 750. Of course, they knew how much I was making because they have people inside Google. My manager, all my managers at Google were part of the network, including Mayur Thakur, who was at that point a Goldman Sachs employee. They knew exactly how much I was making. Anyhow, they offered me 750. And I said, no, it's not. For 750, I wouldn't leave Google. I'm happy here. And then they said $1 million per year. And I said, you got my attention. So I said, send me the offer and I'll think about it. So they sent me the offer. And when they sent me the offer, it didn't say the number. So it said, we're offering you this position as a managing director, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't, no, sorry. It said vice president, which lower than managing director. So at a level below Mayur Thakur and Michael Schlee and Sinead Strain and all those people. So I replied saying, listen, there's two issues here. One is the title. I'm not going to leave Google for a company that has less reputation, less prestige, at a lower position. And the second thing I said is that you're offering me $1 million per year, but you've sent me the offer and the number is not in the offer. So I have no assurance that you're going to really pay me the $1 million per year that you're promising. And then they said, you can trust us. We are the biggest bank in the world. We're not in the business of tricking people or anything. I said, no, if you want me to sign this, you have to put the number in the offer. And I have the offers. I have the paperwork and everything. I'll submit it to court when the time comes. Oh, and by the way, I have these conversations recorded because I was in Texas, and in Texas, the law says that a conversation can be recorded if at least one party in the conversation knows that the conversation is being recorded. So I had the right to record the conversation, and I recorded all these conversations. So anyhow, they sent me the offer again, and this time they offer me the title managing director, so same level as Mayur, as Michael Ashley, as Jeanette Strain. Although Jeanette was my manager's manager, organizationally, from a title point of view at least, we were both managing directors. Anyhow, and the offer said $1 million for the first year, okay? That's what it said specifically. And then I asked the recruiter, but it's only the first year. I have no guarantee that on the second year, they're not gonna drop my compensation. And he was like, but we can't really guarantee forever compensation at the same level because it's the financial industry and we're subject to the markets and blah, blah, blah. So I said, I could live with that, is what I said, with the offer not saying 1 million per year guaranteed forever. Because my reasoning was that if they reduce the compensation on the second year or the third year, I could always leave and go back to Google. Google had this policy, at least in paper, that if you are an engineer and you leave, you can always come back if you leave in good terms, even without even interviewing. Like there's a period, I don't know what it was, like 2 years, that if you come back within 2 years, you don't have to even do the interviews. Anyhow, so I said, okay, it's in the way it's written, it's something that I could accept, is what I said. And that was on a Friday, okay? And this is where the rules came in. So what they did is that they released a press release on Business Insider stating my name and saying that I was going to join Goldman Sachs before I accepted the offer. I had not accepted, I had not signed the offer or sent it to them or even verbally accepted the offer. I said I could live with the wording of the offer, but I said I would need to think about it. Yes. And to be honest, I wasn't fully convinced. I had to think about it. But they released that press release on Business Insider with my name on it, saying that I was joining Goldman Sachs. And I hadn't accepted the offer and I hadn't resigned from my job at Google. So when I come to the office on Monday or Tuesday, I can't recall that week if I went on Monday or on Tuesday, but when I come to the office, my manager, which at the time was Jihua Wu with the local team, the local search ranking team, Chinese, and she's of course marking the index as well, like she's an agent. So she pulls me into a meeting room and she tells me, I've heard that you're leaving. That's what she said. And I was shocked because I didn't know that I was leaving. And then, of course, I had seen the press release when I was on the plane. So I thought that it came from the press release. So I asked her, but why are you saying that? How do you know? And she was like, it's not important how I know. What's important is that you're leaving, right? I mean, at that point, I had no choice. My manager already knew that I had at least the intention to leave. If I stayed, if I said, no, I'm not leaving, and I stayed, she probably would give me bad performance reviews, would not give me raises, would not give me a stock, because she knew managers at Google, they have a pool of, and every company, they have a pool of resources to allocate to the employees. And the way they do it, they allocate it in a way that benefits them personally. Like the ones that work more, supposedly, they allocate more resources to that person, so that person keeps working a lot and making good technology and good progress. If she has a guy that she knows might leave in 6 months or in 3 months, she's not going to spend any resources on that guy. So at that point, I had no choice but to say, yes, I'm leaving. So I signed the offer with Goldman Sachs and left. And the person who sent that press release to Business Insider was Adam Korn, personal. So he's responsible for that. And when I talked to him, he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. It was somebody pulled the trigger before I told them to." Like he made up some excuse, like it wasn't really intentional. But having the geo index and understanding this, how this network works, I understand they were just forcing me to leave Google by my own means to lower the risk, the legal risk with the Michael and Hila situation. And at the same time, they moved me to Goldman Sachs, where I could help Mayur really build this search engine for espionage, right, that he was working on. The reason why I say that is because the supposed reason for Neon internally was to do compliance searches, meaning using that search engine to try to find, that's the pitch that they told the world, try to find people doing things like insider trading or things like that. But I understand now that would be a fundamental piece of the technology for this network. It's obvious that it's something that would be super useful to systematize finding information across the sea of information that they're stealing. They need a search engine for that. Anyhow, fast forward, and I'm going to continue with the saga. Oh, speaking about that, in the list of people from Goldman Sachs, there's one character that I did not mention that is important, somebody called Richard Bennett. He was from GIR, from Global Investment Research. He was the head of that, and he was the antagonist that they set up for me. Like in every single place where they put me, they always set up an antagonist, who's somebody whose job is to block your projects. And in the case of Goldman Sachs, that was Richard Bennett. So anyhow, they did the harassment with Richard Bennett, and then when the year passed, they gave me in paper. Supposedly, they gave me the $1 million, but it wasn't real. The reason I say that is because the salary was 400,000, and the other 600,000 were a bonus. Okay, and the bonus is composed by something like, I don't recall the exact mix, but it was something like, I would say 60% cash and 40% stock, something like that. Don't quote me on the number. Maybe the numbers are not right, but it was a big portion of cash out of the 600K of bonus. It was a big portion of cash, and there was a portion of stock. There was a portion that was a stock, and there was a portion that was cash. Okay. So I said that wasn't specified in the offer, but okay. I said I'm already here. You know, what is there to do? So I continued working for them, and I took the stock and I took the cash. Now the stock there was also a hidden information that they never told me, is that the stock you cannot, even though, so the stock vested in the future, meaning out of those, this is just comical at this point to think about this. So out of those, I don't know, let's put a number to it. So imagine there is a portion in your stock. I don't recall exactly what it was, but assume that it was $250,000. Those $250,000 were not really yours the moment they gave you the bonus. They would vest in the future over 5 years or something like that, or 4 years. So it was a future vesting stock. And if you left the company, then the stock would not vest. So in reality, they didn't, if I left, right, they wouldn't have paid me the $1 million they had promised, because the stock didn't really vest. So I stayed, okay? And the other trick that they pulled is that the stock once vested, you cannot sell it for another 5 years. Meaning, so the first portion of stock of that first year bonus would vest 2 years after, so 1 year after they gave me the bonus, so 2 years after I really joined the company. But I could really use it 5 years after that. So the first portion of that stock that vested on 2020, the first vesting event was in 2020, and it was for a fourth or a fifth of the $250,000. So say that it's $50,000 for simplicity. So the $50,000 invested in 2020, I would really be able to sell them in 2026. Imagine that. And the last portion of that first year bonus that would have vested in 2024, I could only sell it in 2029. But okay, I kept working. Like I realized that this was basically a scheme, a fraudulent scheme. Like they offered me verbally and in writing guaranteed $1 million for the first year, and then they pulled off all these conditions right after I joined. And they did not disclose any of this when I joined. Like they did not tell me this. And after I joined, after the fact, like a year after I joined, they made me sign a paper saying that they had disclosed these rules to me before I joined, but that is not true. They never sent any of this to me. They made me sign that paper after the fact. I think they were fearing that I would sue them. But okay, so fast forward to 2020, I think, what was it, 2021, 2020. I had been there at that point for 2.5 years. And some of that stock had vested, but I could not really sell it. Okay, but I had it on my Fidelity account. So I quit because of the harassment campaign of Scott Weinstein and Jeanette Strain together using employee relations. I quit. And when I quit, a few months after, Goldman Sachs reached out into my investment account and took the stock that had already vested. A stock that was already mine, I could not sell it. It was restricted, but it was mine. They went and took it and canceled it and reclaimed it because I had quit. This is what led to the complaint. I wanted to sue them, but it turns out there's an arbitration clause and I could only go to arbitration. And that's when Mark Zurek, the lawyer here in Houston, came into play. He's marking the index. The network paid Mark Zurek with real estate and his paralegal with real estate. And all this is documented in the website. And his job was to basically pose as if he was representing me in that mediation, but he was really working for Goldman Sachs to further harass me. And I had to file, at the end, I had to agree to a settlement that was damaging to me because my lawyer was working for them. This is fraud. There's no other way to call it. This is fraud. It's pure fraud. Using lawyers, as they always do. So again, Mark Zurek is marked in the index. Okay. Also, we should mention Business Insider, where they placed that press release to trick me, to force me to leave Google, is marking the index. Business Insider, the whole operation, it's a propaganda machine of the network. Same with Benzinga, also co-clustered with Business Insider. It's the same operation. Next, I don't know if this person will have a photo. I would like to show it to you if he has a photo. Also part of the Guess Who section. And yeah, so this is interesting. Okay, so this Lieutenant Jonathan Solomons, also co-clustered with Goldman Sachs, he's a New York police officer. He was active until recently. I don't know if they already removed him because I mentioned him in the website like 6 months ago. He was with this lady, which is Denise Felipe Adams. She's related to Mayor Eric Adams. And this police officer and this lady were participating in these ruses to steal information from key opinion leaders using Nelson Lara as a supposed sales agent of my company. And this is documented before in other videos and in the website as well. So Lieutenant Jonathan Solomons is co-clustered with Goldman Sachs and Major Adams, according to the data that is in the GEO index. Okay. Alvaro Gutierrez also. Alvaro Gutierrez, he's been documented extensively. He was a Googler, a Google engineer. That's where I met him in 2011. He introduced me to Gillian Walsh, who caused me physical harm directly. He introduced me to her, basically. And he participated actively with Anna Codalo or Anna Gannon in stealing information from Calculado Health at that point, another startup that I was working on back in those days in 2018, 19. And they gave the code and the technology to Travis Kalanick. Alvaro Gutierrez, around that time, he started basically asking me for a job at Goldman Sachs. And I referred him and they hired him, okay? And they put him under me in my team. So I was basically his manager. Of course, I thought he was a colleague, but turns out he was an agent. So imagine the setup. They had people under me that were agents, and they had Scott Weinstein above me, who is an agent, harassing me, and the people underneath me also harassing me. And Sinead Strain, who was a Scott manager, defending Scott and also harassing me. It's an impossible situation. And all this to steal the technology because Neon wasn't working to do what they wanted. Addison Landry is the person that they set up to pose as my roommate while I was at Goldman Sachs. So she rented me her apartment, or well, it was like a roommate situation, but she was never there. I was always alone because she probably didn't live there, and the name was probably fake. But the story that was presented to me is that she was from Australia, that she was an Australian citizen, an Australian woman working in New York. And she rented me a room in an apartment, and the address of that, the building is marked in the index. And I think the address was 1 West Street, if I recall correctly. Yes, this tall building over here. And her apartment was one, it wasn't the penthouse, but I think it was the floor below, and it had a terrace that I had access to. So it was somewhere around here. Okay. Okay, moving on. Yes, also co-clustered by the pipeline with the people from Goldman Sachs. There is a, I don't know what to call that, okay? It's an operational hub, but it's really also like a case, I think. So the pipeline picked up months ago that there was a property that was registered to somebody called Jack Smith, who was a prosecutor trying to prosecute Trump, I think, at some point. I don't follow politics, so I don't really know much about what were the grounds for the prosecution or anything. But he was prominent, like he appeared in a lot of news articles, and that's because the pipeline crawls the web and crawls the news sites. So that's why he came up. And as it turns out, the pipeline picked up that surrounding his house, this network had thousands of agents surrounding him. Like you can see, if you examine the data in the index and put it on an app, you will see that the epicenter of that settlement is him. Like the whole purpose, it seems, like looking at the data, that the whole purpose of setting up thousands of properties around him was to harass him. And I see that, and I see the pattern. It's the same thing that they're doing, or that they've been doing to me for years. The reason they did it to me is because they wanted to steal technology I was creating and to make me keep developing it to the point of maturity. So the reasons are different, but the technique is the same, okay? And I mention this because repeatable pattern, criminal enterprise, RICO. So Jack Smith, unfortunately, has been on their harassment list for years. And I imagine, like, looking at how they standardize everything, I imagine probably his doctors, his probably the same thing that they're doing here that I've seen and experienced myself. He must have experienced some of it, if not more. So that's why I'm mentioning it. Also co-cluster with, and these properties, many of those properties, and the details here, I'm going to give them to the FBI in person, but the properties surrounding that house of Jack Smith, there's a proportion of properties co-clustered with Goldman Sachs that it's statistically unusual. So from the data, it seems like this operation came from Goldman Sachs. That's how I interpret it, at least. Also flagged by the pipeline and marked in the geo index of Elon Musk is Vanguard, that investment company that has those 401ks that always win in the market. They're marked in the index. That's why they win in the market. Mark Andreessen, I don't know how to pronounce it, also marking the index personally in Elon Musk's geo index. In terms of companies, there's other companies that also co-cluster with Goldman Sachs for multiple reasons. And I'm going to mention them. They're documented in the website. They're important, crucial part of the internet espionage operation and information control operation. They are Akamai, the content delivery network, Newstar, Limelight. I think they renamed it to something else recently, but it was called Limelight Content Delivery Network, Amazon CloudFront, and remember, all these people from Amazon are flagged, including Charles Elkann and Jeff Bezos, and Cloudflare, another content delivery network. So the content delivery networks are a thing because they are an exceptionally good point for performing man-in-the-middle attacks, which is what they do. Like you see, when they captured my Xfinity tab that services my house, that's what they're doing, a man-in-the-middle attack. They get in the middle, they capture physically the connection, and they intercept the traffic, and then they decrypt it. Right? So these content delivery networks, and I'm not going to get into the technical details of why, but they're like the definition of a man-in-the-middle attack. Okay, and that's why they take them all. Also, co-clustered with Goldman Sachs is GFL, the company that analyzes your trash if you're a target, and the CEO of that company as well, and his name is Patrick Dovigi. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to move a little bit more to Smartmatic, which is also co-clustered with Goldman Sachs. And within Smartmatic, and I've already mentioned Smartmatic before in a different video, but there is a person that I think I did not mention, is very important. It's David Plouffe, I think is the way I would pronounce the last name, Plouffe. And he was the former campaign manager of President Obama, I think in 2008. I don't know exactly which year, but he was the campaign manager. And he's part of the network. David Plouffe is part of the network and is co-clustered very strongly with the Smartmatic, which is the company they use to manipulate elections in multiple countries worldwide and to run this influence operation on elections worldwide. Also, co-cluster with this big cluster of financial crime are two people from Mexico who both have been in the presidency. One is Lopez Obrador, and the other one is Claudia Sheinbaum, I think is the current president. And there is a company, an LLC, and this is mentioned in the website. I don't have access to this from here, so I couldn't find it, but I know it's mentioned. The pipeline found an LLC, I think it was in Panama or the Bahamas, I can't recall, but I think it's Panama. A company registered to a woman on the name of a woman that has a filial relationship to Claudia Sheinbaum. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. So the pipeline thinks that this shell corporation in Panama is tied to her. And it's, of course, marked in the index, and it was flagged. Okay, so it's because it's Panama and it's a country that is not as transparent as to put things on the internet. I don't have access to it deeper, but it seems like it's a thing. Okay. Also flagged is something called VOA News. So this is an organization that is funded by the US government or subsidized, but I don't know exactly what's the financial relationship, but they're supposed to run an independent news gathering channel and investigative. And I made multiple attempts to contact them and they haven't even replied. And then I configured a couple of things in the pipeline to look into it to see if there's a reason why they're not replying. And it seems like people that have been in the past, I couldn't find current people, but people in the past tied to VOA News are flagged in the index, which I think would make sense because this network, that's one of the things that they do. They commit financial crimes and they also control information flow. So people trying to expose them always hit a brick wall. Okay, with that, I'm going to conclude this segment. It was a long segment, but it's important to note these things. This segment of Guess Who? And I'm going to transition a little bit to more technical topics, okay? So the first thing I want to mention is that in one of the previous sessions, I mentioned that I've noticed that next to a couple of locations that are important for this network, there were these water tanks. And I think one was next to Discount Tire Cinco Ranch, where I suspect they service the sensors that they put in the tires of the spy vehicles. And you can see the two water tanks here. And I was looking in that session at the features of it and of the tanks and the dots that they have on top and speculating that it could be markers, like land markers. And so I did some work on this, and it turns out that it's the case. The water tanks are a thing. They're important, very important markers. And then I started reflecting on this. Well, before I tell you what I understood, let me tell you people that got flagged this way. So one person that got flagged by this mechanism of the water tanks was somebody called David Woodham from Consolidated Communications. And this is a photo of him here. Let me see if I can put it. Yeah. So this gentleman over here. This photo is from 2009, I believe. So he probably looks older than in that photo. He is from Consolidated Communications, which is the official internet service provider of the criminal network, right? Here in Katy, at least. Like, for example, Phil Denning, his personal email is from Consolidated Communications. And this is because they need to have this thing under tight controls, so they minimize the risk of espionage by the FBI or the NSA on their agents. So anyhow, very close to Lake Point Estates, if you look for Lake Point Estates, right, this is where Phil Denning lives. So Phil Denning lives around here on this side of the subdivision. So very close to here, there is a place where there's two tanks as well, see? And this happens to be next to a Consolidated Communications facility, which is this one, which is what at the end caused him to be flagged. And also is protecting this house. This house in particular is important. And the address is 24043 River Place Drive, Katy, Texas 77494. And it's tied to a company called Logistical and Freight. It's a logistics company, which logistics is a thing of this network. So the person living there is very important. Yeah, so I think that that house, okay, Jaffer Terra. So this is the actual person. And he has a second address, which ends in with falls on the channel 06, which is intelligence. I don't know, out of curiosity, let's see what is in that service. This is funny. So see, they basically removed the houses from the map. You can see that there are streets, but you cannot see any houses. And you can see in the street view photo that there is a house in there. And there is even a car park Moscow style outside. But they removed the houses from the satellite view. Like you cannot see the houses. It looks like if it's agricultural land. So that tells you that this is a very important person. They went to the length of changing the satellite imagery of an entire neighborhood. So long story short, the water tanks are a thing, okay? And I have here another one. Oh yes, so this one that I went visit this one yesterday is also protected by a water tank. So this water tank that is here, I understood why, I think, and this is a theory, but I think I understood the reason behind the water tank. The reason, and this is important because it ties Google into this a little bit. The reason lies on the size of the tiles of Google Maps. So Google Maps, when you see this satellite imagery, you don't really see it, but it's really composed by tiles. And each tile has a dimension, and there's the zoom level. So if you zoom in, the tiles get smaller. So you're looking to, because you're fitting in the same screen a certain number of tiles, and you're zooming in, the tiles are smaller. And if you zoom out, the tiles are bigger. So the problem they're solving with this is indexing. It's an indexing system. So what they're doing is being able to find important locations by looking visually at the tile. The system, their computer system, not a human, but a computer system, looks at the tile and classifies the objects and says, this is probably a water tank. This is probably a house. This is probably a building. This is probably, I don't know, a gas tank, if you look at this image, right? Now, what they're doing is, if, at a zoom level of, the zoom levels at Google Maps go from 0 to 22. 22 being the highest, the highest zoom. So if I increase it to the maximum, this is level 22, okay? At level 22, and I researched this before coming to do this demo. At level 21, there are 287 trillion tiles in the entire planet. Of course, they don't have to search through the entire planet, because if they're looking for a location in Houston, they only have to search the tiles within Houston. But I'm going to talk about the entire planet so you get an idea of how this system works. So if you look at the entire planet, level 21, there's 287 trillion tiles. At level 20, there are 1 trillion. At level 19, there are 274 billion. And each tile at level 19 is 76 meters by 76 meters, okay? At the equator, because this also depends on the latitude, because the Earth is not perfectly round. But for simplicity, let's assume that it's 76 meters. So as you go down in zoom level, or go up, depending on how you look at it, at level 18, so zooming out, there's 68 billion tiles in the world. At level 17, there's 17 billion, and each tile measures 152 meters at the equator. And at level 16, now there's only 4 billion, and they measure 600 meters. So if you think of a city, like, for example, Katy, what they're doing is they're processing all the tiles, and they're classifying at level, I think probably level 17, okay? And they're classifying what object is visible in each tile of all the 17 billion tiles. So the ones that the classifier thinks, oh, this is probably a water tank, looked from above, it's going to be a handful of them only. So they could search very quickly through this small set of water tank tiles, and they could, so it could be, I don't know, in the entire planet. How many tiles? Question is, in Google Earth, at level zoom 17, how many tiles could be classified as having a water tank? I don't know. I haven't done the math, but I imagine it could be something like 1,000 tiles, or I don't know, 10,000 tiles. It's a small number. For a computer, that's nothing. They could find people like that or places. So what they do is that next to these water tanks, they put important people and they put important businesses. So their system, which is basically a classifier of satellite imagery, can find them very quickly, because the size of the tile reduces the number of candidates. It's simply a retrieval system. That's what it is. So bad news is that now we know where the important people are, and these records of these houses, they can delete them from the public record, but I imagine the FBI has a copy. So these people are doomed. How do you escape from that? At least in Canada. So that's the mystery of the water tanks. That's why they do it. And the same idea applies to the running tracks. That's why if you go to FM 1463 and Cinco Ranch, so this is the apartment complex where Diosdado Cabello still has my son like captive right here. And next to it, they have, and I'm not saying that because my son is captive there, they did this thing with the running track. No, what I'm saying is this apartment complex is a huge operational important base of Diosdado Cabello, and that's why this running track is here. This running track is there because it would be a tile, I think, of level 16 even. So it's even fewer candidates, which means that it's easier, faster to find it. They have probably a system to find important apartment complexes controlled by Diosdado Cabello and Xi Jinping. And there's going to be a handful of those, I don't know, 100, 200, like where the important, very important people live. So they mark those with the running tracks, because it means that because of the size, the dimensions of the track, and that's why, and the colors. That's why that tone of orange, or I don't know what color is that, right? But the color is important. And that's why it is kept in such a tip-top shape. Like you go to that running track and it's pristine. Like the green in the grass is pristine because the colors are important for the classifier to work with high precision. So that's how it works. And it's just a matter of being able to find important locations quickly. That's why they mark them with these huge structures like stadiums and running tracks and water tanks and things like that. The water tanks, of course, give the additional advantage that they provide a point of observation that is tall, which gives you a helicopter view of anything surrounding that important person or that important location. So in terms of hierarchy, I would think that something located next to a water tank is more important or carries more liability for Diosdado Cabello specifically than something next to a running track, because this has not only the size, the ground dimension, but also height for observation. So what I'm saying is that within these landmarks, and there might be others that they use. These are the only the ones that I'm observing, but there might be other similar types of landmarks that they use. The ones that have height probably imply that the thing that they're protecting is more important than the things that are flat on the ground, like the basketball courts that they put in the backyards of some prominent houses. Those are flat structures. They're simply there to mark so the classifier can work. But the ones that are additionally tall, like the cityscape, I think it's called, that is next to Lake Point Estates. It's a huge structure which would make retrieval using classifiers easy because it will be a smaller number of tiles, but also it's elevated because they want the visual angle to it as well. And that aligns with Lake Point Estates being an important residential area for these spies. So I wanted to mention that. Okay. So another thing I wanted to mention is, and this is not some technical, but uh, when I started looking into addresses in Caracas marked in the UA index, that's when Diosdado Cabello decided to file for divorce against me and ask for a restraining order and kidnap my son. And at the same time, just a few weeks after that, in response, I filed a class action lawsuit naming Wilmer Ruperi in that class action lawsuit. And Wilmer Ruperi being an important operator of Diosdado Cabello here in the US to evade sanctions and to help Venezuela and Iran evade sanctions, international economic sanctions. I'm mentioning all this because I've noticed something, is that on both cases, on both judicial cases, the divorce petition / restraining order that Diosdado Cabello filed against me and the class action lawsuit that I filed in response, in both cases, I don't get any correspondence from the courts. And I know for a fact that the courts have issued citations. For example, in the case of the restraining order that Diosdado Cabello petitioned, my former partner told me that there was an appointment set for July 23rd. She received the letter. I did not receive the letter. So it could be a way of impeding me to go, obstructing justice, obstructing the respondent to be present so they can make a decision without me being there. And on the case of the federal court, I went and saw in the calendar, which is public, that there was an initial conference set for, I think it was August 28th, if I'm not mistaken. I posted the date on the YouTube channel, but there's a date set in the calendar, and I did not receive any correspondence. Because these are two different courts, two different processes. The commonality is USPS. And I know that DeJoy, the former Postmaster General, was flagged in the Elon Musk's Geo Index. So it's possible that they're intercepting my mail so I don't get any correspondence from any of these two courts. So they can then justify an unjustifiable decision, like the judge not recusing himself on the restraining order case. So I wanted to mention that. Also, I want to talk a little bit about the Brazil cluster. This is documented in the website. I'm just going to mention the names. In this cluster, we have Rui Lopez from Google, Susana Aguiar from SAP, Luis Angeli from Accenture Brazil, Wincom, the Brazilian company operating in Houston that employed my former partner and Francisco Castillo for years. SAP Brazil is in this cluster, and they're also co-clustered with Travis Kalanick because of the Calculado Health IP theft. And Accenture Brazil is also flagged in the index. SAP Brazil is also flagged in the index. Okay, I'm gonna mention other players that are important. Mario Fattorello, he's a psychoanalyst, like a psychologist, Venezuelan, and he works for the SEBIN to extract information from his patients. And he was co-clustered with Edith Perez, who is also Venezuelan, also from the oil company days. And she went to school with my little sister, and she is here in Katy right now. Also flagged O'Connor Associates. This is a company that helps because they have this scheme here, at least here in Katy, where they get super high property tax refunds. And this is documented in their website. And so they're tricking the county to giving them unusually high property tax returns. It's a way for them to also launder their money, because what they're doing is the network is paying for these houses and the mortgages and all that with money that at the end is coming from Jose David and Desaro Cabello. And then they get a refund, the agents get a refund via this thing with O'Connor Associates, which is clean money that it's now in the US financial system. Also flagged somebody called Sanda Dyke from San Francisco. Rajan Patel from Google, he was the inventor or one of the inventors of NavBoost. That's very important. And ZoomInfo, the company, and the CEO of ZoomInfo are also flagged. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about tech subjects. Okay, so yesterday I went very early in the morning. So yesterday being July 12th, very early in the morning to do a round in some houses I wanted to scan. And they were, of course, following me. But there was this particular person that was stalking me. Like, he was waiting for me in a corner, was just static there, waiting for me to pass. And so anyhow, I passed next to him and took a photo. And his flag. So I wanted to mention that stalking incident. Also, in that area, there was a Katy ISD police vehicle parked in a driveway in a house that is marked in the Geo Index of Elon Musk and surrounded by other houses marked. And there were, like, of course, cars parked Moscow style. So yeah, concerning, because this is the police so the Katy ISD is basically the school district of Katy. So this is the police that polices the schools. And probably this police officer, because if the car was there, it's because the police officer lives there. That Katy ISD police officer is part of the network. Also, in the same area, there was a firefighter truck, official truck, red with the logo of the Katy firefighters and everything. Also parked in one of these houses marked in the index in that area. All of these are in the videos that are posted on YouTube already on the Cold Mobile channel. There was also a person that was, let me show you where that was. And I will post the individual pictures. But when I went to Lake Point Estates yesterday, they were following me. They're useful. And here, in this point, there was a sedan, a black sedan. I think it was an Acura, but I'm not sure. I have to check the video. And I haven't run this through the pipeline because I was already on my way back. But around 29.74566 minus 95.79366, there was a black sedan parked, and the agent that came outside of the gym that is in the corner came into that car. He's been flagged before. I recognize his face. I'll try to find to see if he got recorded this time, but I saw him visually with my eyes, and I know that I've seen his face before, and he's very prominent. So maybe the recordings of that shopping mall, maybe, or from the gym. It must have cameras for liability reasons. That gym that is located here, the Tile Boxing Club, Katy, this one. He was coming out of the gym with the gloves and everything. Another thing, my Pixel phone. So I have a Pixel that I bought directly from Google, from the Google Fi Store. It's bugged, not at the carrier level, but the phone itself has a bug. And this is interesting because it was shipped to me directly by Google. So either Google was in it, or somehow they intercepted the phone and bugged it. Either way, it could be interesting to know how they did it. Also, the Stanley water bottles bought at Amazon have been flagged for months. They're bugs. Like those water bottles are bugs, very sophisticated bugs. And I have two of them saved for the FBI to analyze when I get the chance to give it to them. Okay, and now to close, I'm going to talk about a bit more on the update. I'm going to give updates on the personal, more on the personal side of things. So one thing I noticed is that after I got that information about David Molero and well, information I got from the informant about the forced vasectomy, something strange happened. My former partner and I, we had this agreement to not talk about the separation slash restraining order and to resolve this in court to avoid friction between us. But strangely, the day after I posted that video, she came here and she was talking to me and she said, I have to talk to you about something. And then she said something like, I talked to my lawyer today, so to her lawyer. So she talked to her lawyer and she was talking about thinking about removing the claims that I'm crazy. I didn't ask her to remove those claims, but she mentioned in a couple of occasions things like implying that I asked her. I didn't ask her to remove those claims. I want those claims to remain in because that allows me to insert all this into the legal record. I have no reasons or interest to remove those claims or to want to remove those claims. But anyhow, she's been saying that we've talked about removing the claims. I don't argue with her because I'm not going to start an argument for something that has no point. But so anyhow, she starts the conversation by saying that she was talking to the lawyer about possibly removing the claims that I'm crazy. And then the lawyer told her, and this is what she told me, that it's not possible to remove them because the process is already at the motion stage and that it cannot be removed. That one solution could be that we could perhaps reach an agreement outside of court, like a private agreement outside of court between her and me, and that way we could avoid altogether the process. I don't know. It felt to me like they're trying to get out of court, right? Now that they know that all of this is going to become part of the record. It's already part of the record. So it felt to me like a desperate attempt to backpedal. So of course I said no. Let's resolve this with a judge. Let's see what happens. And so that was 2 days ago. So yesterday, my former partner started sending me text messages, strange text messages. Like they felt like designed by a lawyer. Like the text messages were without provocation or reason or anything. Like I wasn't saying anything bad or anything. But she started saying that I was controlling and that I'm trying to harm her. So I don't know. It felt to me like a series of text messages designed by Morgan Heibner or another lawyer, designed to make it look, I'm guessing, what I can see, what I can sense, is that what is going to come next from them is some sort of allegation that I'm saying these things to harm her. This is a way of me being controlling, and maybe from controlling, they will jump to manipulative. I imagine something like that. They're going to say that this is just a campaign that I'm advancing to actually harm her, which is just not true. And I said this multiple times before. I don't hate her. I don't have any animosity towards. I understand the situation. Anyhow, I wanted to put that out there because when it comes, then people will be able to see, yeah, he was right. So that's that. Yeah. Okay, so this is, and here I apologize. I have to give a little bit of details that are personal. But I think it's important because it could be a pattern. Okay. So after I got that information from the informant, I remember something that could be crucial. Okay. In the last video, I said something like, I didn't see any indications that I could have had a vasectomy. What I meant by that is that I've seen in the movies, and I don't know, I think in Big Bang Theory, there is an episode where one of them gets a vasectomy and he's like in bed for 3 days and it hurts and he's complaining of the pain. I remember that after the operation, I saw bruises in my pelvic area, okay? But nothing in the area where you would expect to see bruises or incisions or something if you get a vasectomy, but more under the pelvic area. But I had bruises. So I think I understood. So I think the way it works is that in this type of procedures, they bruise the target with an instrument or something. They create bruises. So if they really did the vasectomy and it hurts, the target would think that it was hurting because of the bruises, that it was that I got bruised during the operation. Maybe they didn't handle my body correctly or I fell or something, right, during the operation. And that's why I'm experiencing this pain. Now, but I understand that's probably part of the mechanism of how they make the subject or the target believe that this pain is normal if they experience the pain because they did the vasectomy. What that tells me is that this is also standardized. This is a standard procedure. And there might be other people out there that went for a plastic surgery procedure and came out with inexplicable bruises on their pelvic area and had pain. I have to go to a doctor when I can, when I'm able to see a doctor that is not controlled by the Usado Cabello and find out. But it seems like a standardized procedure. And I think the reason why they pick plastic surgery specifically is because, side note, they could have done it with other type of surgery. They could have produced some kind of symptom. And they can do that via multiple ways. With the protein shakes from Amazon, that would have prompted me to go to the doctor, and that doctor could have recommended another operation. But it's a plastic surgery. And I think the reason is because there's certain taboo around plastic surgery, and people are less likely to talk about it and to go to the authorities if it's a plastic surgery. So I think that's probably why. So basically, the idea is get the target into plastic surgery using the friends to seed the idea in their head. Then do the vasectomy, or if it's a woman, I don't know what it's called when it's a woman, but the equivalent procedure for a woman, produce bruises, right, near the area. So if they feel pain, they don't think that they were sterilized, and then nobody knows. So because of that, if it's standardized in that way, then it would mean that plastic surgeons are the Achilles heel of this because they could be tracked. So all authorities would need to do is make a list of all the plastic surgeons that are prominent, because these targets are going to go to prominent ones. Right? Plastic surgeons that are making more than $1 million a year in personal income that are marked in the index. That's going to be a very small set of plastic surgeons. And then maybe look for people that had bruises or that reported having bruises. Could be, right? Anyhow, another person important is somebody called Ramon Sanchez from a company called Controlled Networks. And he carries a lot of liability because he was involved in a ruse to basically prevent me to buy servers. And he's important. I'm not going to give much details, but suffice to say that he's very important. His name is Ramon Sanchez. Allegedly, or what I heard, is that he's of Cuban origin, and he was also a NASA ex-engineer. So, like he has all the checkboxes. And the company that he owns, a company called Controlled Networks, which is in networking, and he basically has a small telecom operator where he can assign cell phone numbers, reroute traffic, like cell phone traffic. it sounds like the kind of company this network would utilize to do things like intercepting cell phones and intercepting traffic from cell phones and things like that. So besides of the liability that he carries because of interactions with me, I think his line of work and the company he owns are probably fundamental to this organization. So with that, I'm going to close this session, which is, it seems like it ran pretty long, and I apologize for that. But, oh, I have one more item. Sorry, I should have mentioned this. Altuve, the baseball player, is flagged in the index, and also at some point, and also he carries liability because he interacted with me directly via Jose Castillo, who was the person that was helping me like doing improvements to my house. And he's an agent of the seven. Like Jose Castillo is an agent, and he introduced me to Altuve, not personally, but like at some point, Altuve even gave me a check. And I have the check here. I'm going to show it. I hope that it can be seen in camera. It has the signature of Altuve and the account number. Everything is in there. And this probably has the fingerprints of Altuve and Jose Castillo together. So it could be it could have some probatory value for Altuve. So I have that with me. With that, I'm going to conclude this session on Goldman Sachs and how they operate. And I hope that this really helps the free world. And I'll see you on the next one.